The Pac-12 is a conference that we have been talking about a lot over the last couple of days on the JT Sports Podcast, and we're going to continue talking about teams inside of this conference because there are a good amount of teams in the Pac-12 that could surprise many people this year. I definitely think that the Pac-12 conference as a whole, when it comes to the football sense, could have a resurgence in 2022. And let's talk about Washington State football, the Cougars in Pullman, Washington. So last year, they had a weird situation with their former head coach, Rolovich, who decided that he didn't want to go ahead and get that shot, and then he ended up getting fired because of it, because there was a mandate in the state of Washington that all employees had to be vaccinated. So he ended up getting fired because of it. And then Dickert, who was the defensive coordinator at the time, ended up becoming the interim head coach for the Cougs. And during his time as the interim head coach, he led them to a 3-2 record to close out the season, including a 40-13 win over the rival Washington to snap their 7-game losing streak against that school in the Apple Cup. So after the season, he was announced as the full-time head coach for the program, and now he's going into his first full-time season as the head coach of Washington State. He brings in the offensive coordinator Eric Morris, who this past season spent time as the head coach for Incarnate World. He also has been part of the Washington State football program in the past. He spent time as a receivers coach under Mike Leach before he departed for Mississippi State. So when you look at Eric Morris and you look at Jake Dickert, it looks like they're going to be bringing back the air raid offense back to Pullman. And following Eric Morris from Incarnate World follows his star quarterback, Carmen Ward. Now, Carmen Ward was a transfer from Incarnate World, and he was one of the highest rated quarterbacks coming out of the transfer portal during this cycle. And when you look at Cameron Ward, this is somebody who is a physical freak. He's 6'3", 220, 225 pounds. He won the Jerry Rice Award his freshman season back in 2020, which is awarded to the best freshman player in the FCS for that season. Last year, he took Incarnate World all the way to the second round of the FCS playoffs last year. He threw for 4,648 passing yards, 47 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, and he also completed 65.1% of his passes. And a large reason why I have my eyes on Washington State is because of Cameron Ward. Because not too many people know who this guy is and how good he actually is. But if you go and you watch his tape, this dude has a phenomenal arm. He can make throws from any platform. This is a NFL level quarterback. And if he ends up putting it all together this year for Washington State, not only is this going to be a solid football team that could probably win 6-7 games and exceed their win total of 5.5 wins this year, according to Las Vegas. But this is also a player who has a high chance of becoming a first-round draft pick in next year's 2023 NFL Draft. And I have this theory. You might have heard it before, but I call it the superstar quarterback effect, right? So my theory is that I believe that if you have a phenomenal college quarterback that we believe to be a superstar, that as long as you give him an average team around him, he's good enough to win you 6 games, maybe 7. And I think Cameron Ward is that kind of quarterback. He's also a really good athlete. It won't be reflected if you go and you check his rushing stats, because his rushing stats aren't all that great. But if you actually watch the games and you see him move, this dude has some wheels. So I'm really excited about what Cameron Ward can do with Washington State. Now, the supporting cast around him, I'm not going to say it's bad. It's all right. It could be better. The wide receiver position, you have Deshaun Stribling. You have Renard Bell at wide receiver. Stribling had 44 receptions, 471 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns last season. Bell suffered a season-ending injury in the summer, so he wasn't able to play last year. But however, the last time we saw him on the field when he was healthy during 2020, he had 33 receptions for 337 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. You also have Lincoln Victor and Donovan Ollie. So you do have some serviceable players at the wide receiver, and I think that Stribling does have the potential to elevate his game. And of course, with Cameron Ward there at quarterback, he should elevate the play of the wide receivers. And it's not as if Washington State had a bad quarterback situation last year. They had Jaden DeLora, who ended up transferring during this offseason to Arizona. But I think that Cameron Ward definitely is an upgrade. And if he ends up playing up to the level that I think that he can, and he ends up playing up to being a first-round pick, there's no reason why Washington State shouldn't be able to exceed their win total expectations this year. The offensive line, it's kind of weird because they do have some returning starters who have some experience. They also added some key transfers from the transfer portal who should also start on this offensive line. But there are many players who are having their positions changed. They're kind of moving players around on the offensive line to get the best overall performance from this group. So you're going to have players who, although they had some experience, they're going to be playing completely different positions this year. So I don't know how that's going to work out. But with the air raid offense, you definitely are going to want to put a lot of emphasis on trying to get the ball out fast and whatnot. And I don't think that their offensive line is really going to be a problem until they start facing some of the better teams in the Pac-12. On the defensive side, they were pretty solid last year. I think their defense definitely should remain pretty decent this year. They do have a decent amount of guys who return. And they also added a couple of players in the transfer portal, such as linebacker Dayan Henley from Nevada. He had 94 tackles, 4 interceptions, and 3 fumble recoveries last year. Their pass rush on the defensive line should be pretty good. You return Ron Stone and Brendan Jackson. Both were tied for the team lead in sacks last year at 5 apiece. Cornerback is a position that I pretty much am in love with on this team. Amarni Marsh had 70 tackles, which was third on the team, 4 pass deflections, 3 interceptions, and 2 forced fumbles. He's more of a slot corner. I also like Derek Langford, who is their outside corner. He's also pretty solid as well. They also have Jordan Lee, who is another Nevada transfer. 85 tackles, 3 forced fumbles, 5 fumble recoveries, and pass deflections. This man was all over the field for the Wolfpack last year. You also have Sam Lockett III, who is a junior college transfer. He helped lead his junior college team to a perfect undefeated season at 13-0. He had 38 tackles, 3 interceptions, 3 pass deflections as well. So this is a Washington State team that if Cameron Ward plays really well and he ends up being as good as what I expect, I think that this is a team that definitely could surprise many people. They opened the season up against Idaho, which is a game that they should be able to win and win easily. Then you have to go on the road to Wisconsin. That game is going to be 3:30 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. That's probably going to be a game that they most likely could lose because Wisconsin's defense should still be very phenomenal. On top of that, they should take a major step forward when it comes to their offensive productivity this year. Then you play Colorado State. I think that's a winnable game. So you go 2-1 there. Then this is where you start to enter conference play. And this is where the meat and potatoes of Washington State's schedule is going to be. You play Oregon, but you have them at home. Oregon is still a really good team, despite the fact that they lost Mario Cristobal. He recruited at a really high level there in Oregon, and I think that Oregon football team is a team that not too many people are talking about. So that's a game that probably could be a loss, but you do play Cal. You also play them at home. I think that's a pretty winnable game. You got to go on the road to USC. Depending on how well USC's defense looks this year, Washington State could have a chance because if USC's defense isn't all that great, they should be able to keep up with them offensively just because they have Cameron Ward. You go on the road to Arizona State. Now, Arizona State is a team that many people are overlooking, and they may end up being my biggest sleeper team in this conference because they have a lot of talent on the offensive line. Their defense also looks pretty good as well. Then you have to play Utah, but you're playing them at home coming off a bye week. And then to close out your schedule, it gets pretty easier from there because then you have to play Stanford, Arizona State. Both of those two programs are projected with win totals of 5.5. Maybe Stanford could surprise some people. Then you have Arizona and Washington in the Apple Cup to close out the season. So this definitely is a team that could end up winning 7 games, maybe 8. But really, how well this team performs this year is solely going to be off the performance of quarterback Carmen Ward. If Cameron Ward ends up being as good as what he was at Incarnate World, wherever that's located at, I think that this is a team that's going to be able to exceed their expectations. And I definitely think that if you are somebody who likes to bet on win totals or the over-under, I definitely think that Washington State is a really good value pick. And it's really solely going to be off how much you trust Cameron Ward. I have a lot of faith in him. I think he's going to be really phenomenal this year. I think that he's going to set the college world on fire, because you got to remember, his head coach last year also comes to Washington State. So he isn't really learning a new offense. The terminology isn't going to be anything new. He's basically going to be able to pick up from where he left off last season. I think that was a big reason why he decided to transfer to Pullman, because he probably could have transferred to a lot of other schools. He probably had some big offers from some P5 schools as well. So for him, I really think that he's going to be able to elevate this team. He reminds me similar of Vernon Adams, even though he's better than what Vernon Adams was. But for those of you guys who are diehard Pac-12 fans, you probably remember Vernon Adams when he lit up Oregon State a couple of years back when Oregon State was really good and they were ranked. Eastern Washington went absolutely berserker on Oregon State that year, led by Vernon Adams. He was one of the best players from the FCS during that time. I believe he plays in the CFL now. So with him being better, he kind of reminds me a little bit of him, not really in terms of their skill set, but mainly because of their stories, because they were both very productive players in the FCS. And Vernon Adams did have a pretty solid career at Oregon, despite the fact that it did take him a while to get things going. But when he got things figured out, he was really solid for the Ducks. Probably one of the better quarterbacks that Oregon has had over the last couple of years, minus Justin Herbert and Marcus Mariota. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what Cameron Ward does this year. I definitely think that this is somebody who has a high possibility of breaking out and putting up video game-like numbers. He's also going to be dynamic on the ground as well. He's probably going to have to carry this Washington State team on his back, even though he should have a pretty solid defense. I think that his supporting cast isn't going to be all that great. I don't have a lot of confidence in the running back, but this is an air raid offense, and even though they did say that they're going to run the ball a little bit more compared to what you would normally see from a team that runs the air raid style offense, I still think that Ward is going to carry the bulk of the ground game, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up leading the team in rushing yards. So I think that Washington State definitely is a team that you shouldn't overlook, simply for the fact that they have this stud at quarterback, and if he ends up playing phenomenally well, this is definitely a team that could end up over exceeding the expectations this year.